Now, the other person who's going to help us set the scene for today and give us a sense of where we are right now in reading in Australia is Anna Burkey. And Anna is the head of Australia Reads. Anna's joining us to outline the challenges and the opportunities that we face as a sector. And hi Anna.
Hey Jess.
While you're tuning in, Anna, I want everyone to please head on over to Slido. The conversation is going off on Slido already. We are starting to learn where everybody's coming from, and it's wonderful. But we'd love to know more about what successes or challenges you're seeing around reading in Australia at the moment. We're learning a lot about where you're coming from and what you do in the sector, but we want to know more about your perspective on the sector. So, Anna, tell us, where are we now when it comes to reading in Australia?
Where are we now? Well, I can do a little bit to set the scene, but I'm very much looking forward to keeping the conversation going in Slido. And we have had a query as well about whether there's any social media hashtags. So we'd love to keep most of the conversation in Slido so that we can respond back and forth with you. But if you are over on the socials, you can use hashtag volume symposium. So hello, everyone. I am Anna and I am a reader. I'm also really passionate about getting more people reading more often. And by reading, I mean reading in all its beautiful forms and formats. We are so lucky to live in an era with beautifully made paperbacks, with audiobooks to fill our ears when out for a morning walk, and of course that one-click magic of getting hold of an ebook instantly. There is so much to love. And I know that most of you watching feel the same way about reading, and that's why we're here together today. Out there, we've got, for looking at that word cloud as well, and what's coming through the chat, we've got librarians and teachers and school librarians. Hello to you. We've got booksellers, publishers, writers, illustrators, festival colleagues, and many colleagues from literature and cultural organizations. So hello, everyone. Keep the chat coming in the Slido, comments, questions, pop-in thoughts that come to mind. We're trying to make this as much a conversation as possible. And I can't promise to be able to have the answers to all your questions, but asking those questions helps us understand what we might need to know or share more about more obviously as a sector. And it can also help us define where we go next. We're all part of an ecosystem that supports reading. It's a really broad ecosystem with about 30,000 people employed in some form of that work. And I'm not sure that we get a chance to get together across the different disciplines all that often to talk about reading. I'm so glad, therefore, that we could all be here and have this conversation. Reading is remarkable. To misquote the internet, we are hypnotized by squiggles of ink on the flesh of a dead tree or the glass of a screen, often for hours at a time, transported into other worlds and ways of being. That act can have a profoundly positive effect. One of the strongest indicators of future success for a child is whether they read for pleasure, regardless of their social class or background. Perhaps understandably, most of the research out there about reading centers on children and young people and their families. So for example, did you know that 3-year-olds who can name their favorite book are better readers at the age of 7? And if you can read at 7, then you're well set up for school, and you're also more likely to stay a reader across your lifetime. So we have an indicator from age 3 of what might happen for the rest of that reader's life. And once at school, both primary and secondary students who get independent reading time are far more likely to enjoy reading books for fun outside of school. They're more likely to make that choice. So when it comes to those favorite books, almost all children from the ages of 6 to 17 say that their favorite books are ones that they have picked out for themselves. Of course, though, children don't read in isolation. Those who see adults reading model their behavior. So we don't have to tell people to read. Having reading present in our lives, visibly doing it regularly ourselves and talking about it and making space for it to happen, that all makes a big difference, the research tells us. From all this, we can deduce that autonomy is a really important factor for engaging readers of all ages, and that seeing others around you reading has a really deep impact, and that it's important to validate other people's individual reading choices. All books are good. Something for us to consider when designing programs and campaigns to engage readers. Autonomy is an important design criteria. And in fact, that's a useful way to think about research. Sure, we can use statistics in promotions, but we can also use them to understand what those most important factors, behavioral factors are to include in the design of our campaigns and our programs. And then, of course, there's the well-known social impact and the documented health benefits that reading brings all of us. Reading for just half an hour a week means we are 57% more likely to have a great awareness of other cultures. Reading promotes empathy, understanding of others. It expands our world. We're also, as readers, far less likely to report being lonely. And in the face of a loneliness epidemic in our world today, that suggests a strong role that reading could play in tackling that social problem. Adults who read almost every day have a substantially lower risk of being diagnosed with depression. Almost half of readers say it helped them get a better night's sleep. And a 20% reduction in mortality has been observed for those who read. So reading makes us live longer. Loneliness, mental and physical health, those are huge areas for our society as a whole. And working directly with health and social care practitioners on encouraging reading would likely have really great outcomes for our whole community. And I know many of you out there have already started forging connections with people who work in those spaces. You can get a copy, by the way, of those statistics I mentioned and the others that I'll bring up and more by downloading our research review snapshot on the Australia Reads website. All Australians deserve to get these benefits of reading, to have the skills to read, to have the desire to choose to read for pleasure, and have access to the books, the programs, and the people that support their reading. 44% of Australians have low or very low literacy rates. The Australian Bureau of Statistics research showed a 7% drop in young people choosing to read for pleasure, down to 72%. And we know that increases for older teenagers with the summer slump around school holidays. The new National Arts Participation Report that came out yesterday also suggests a drop in reading. So we need to monitor these trends. And we also need to unpack the data so we can design and fund interventions that address these challenges effectively. And as a sector, we do face some systemic challenges while all of this is also going on. School libraries are under constant threat with cuts to budgets and specialised staff. So a shout out to our school librarians and the Save Our School Libraries team who are campaigning against cuts. Public libraries have huge pressures to support their communities across so many different local services, like tackling the digital divide, for example. And our booksellers have suffered immense pressure during COVID with the restrictions on retail. The speedy rise of AI and how it's going to affect reading and writing, the recent attempts to ban books and restrict story times, the cost of living pressures, the social and cultural currents of our society all play out in the reading space. So there's a lot going on. While some of these are challenging figures and trends, there is at least a lot of success around reading, and there's a lot for us to build on. Whether they read frequently or not, 87% of people believe in the importance of reading. And that's not a battle we need to win. They already believe that it's critical and important. Book sales grew during the lockdown years. People who read wanted to read more. Social media has given us new forums for discussing books, with Book Talk and Bookstagram having a notable influence on sales and loans. And young people in these spaces feel comfortable to share not just what they're reading, but their feelings and emotions about books. It's a sort of compounded positive peer pressure, generating a sense of everyone's reading, I will too. Audiobook listening is on the rise. Almost a third of us tune in, and 37% started just in the last 12 months. And graphic novels have exploded in the last couple of years. They're the fourth biggest sales category in Australia. Dedicated stores are appearing in mainstream settings. That's great news. There are plenty of readers around. We want to keep them reading. And for the roughly 25% of Australians who didn't read a book in the last year, and the 28% of young people who don't choose to read for pleasure, we need to understand more about them, what they do engage with, and look at different ways to reach them from some of our current models. There are many individual programs and organizations, many of you out there around the country, connecting effectively with readers, often at a local level or at a state level. There are many individuals who are working so hard for so many years directly with readers, recommending new titles, running book clubs, giving talks, hosting podcasts now, commissioning brave new works, and this is essential work. Yet it can also feel still like a struggle sometimes to get the resources, the budget to be heard, trying to tackle everything yourself from working out the research, designing the program, delivering it. And sometimes that can get a bit lonely. We need to ensure as a country that we can sustain this essential work and at the same time develop new audiences of readers and respond to the changing ways of reading. So some things for us that could help us along the way. We're thinking about partnerships with other industries, thinking about putting the reader at the center and creating messaging that really is heard by them, as opposed to what we want to say. Thinking about how we scale programs so that one person isn't doing all the work, and how we might increase the visibility and conversation about reading in our society. Partnerships with other sectors can be highly effective. Obvious contenders for us are professionals in health, early years, and social care. And I know, again, many of you starting or have for some time begun these relationships. We'll need to talk the language of those partners effectively and pitch them relevant programs. So we're going to have a nice, consistent sector message for all of us to use about reading benefits that makes sense to those professionals in their world and that we can take to state and federal and corporate supporters. And we've got to be able to back those messages up with research to be able to prove it works. That clear message to help us advocate for support and investment is also one to consider how when we think about adapting our message for talking about reading to the public for different audience groups. As probably sounds obvious, the more conversations and activities about reading outside the traditional reading spaces, the pub, the doctor's surgery, the dinner table, the further embedded in society reading is. And while we all know a lot, there's probably a few questions that might help us with this. If we can use research to understand the most important aspects that influence behavior, we can design campaigns to include those things, back to that point about autonomy being important, for example. What is it that really motivates people to pick up a book? And what stops them? Do we really understand that? For example, we hear, I just don't have time a lot. 37% of Australians say that's why they don't read more. So what does that really mean in practice? Are they too tired after work or school? Do they have too many other commitments? Maybe they feel selfish taking time out for themselves. Or are they choosing other forms of entertainment in their spare time, or is it a mix of all of that? There's a lot yet to understand that can inform how we engage readers. And that brings me to scale. There are so many successful reading programs in our country with proven impact for their target groups, but they're often delivered by an individual, a small group, a small organization. For those programs that work well, that have a clear purpose, that track how they build readership and positive reading behaviors, can we invest in those and scale them up, provide more access for more of us to those? So that we can all have access to centralized resources that are made by experts based on research that are fun and a great fit, that are a social experience of reading for their target audiences, and that then we can adapt them locally. A nice mix of something held nationally but delivered locally. That means that those on the ground connecting with readers can focus on that connection, not trying to also create every single program for every type of reader or every kind of marketing campaign. So some of the questions swirling around for me right now are, do we have the right mix of programs across our country, across age groups, not held by one organization or one state, but across the whole country? And if we do, how do we make more of them available, or at least make them seen so that we can all learn from what's working and where? How do we shift our marketing to reach new groups? And how do we focus, choose priorities? We can't do everything all at once. So this is kind of some of the things that I'm thinking about from an Australia Reads perspective. And I'm hoping to learn lots from some of our wise speakers. I've perhaps raised more questions than answers right now, but many of our wise speakers from the rest of today are going to have excellent insights into how we might start to approach these questions. Because of course, in the midst of all of this, we've got to continue to champion our cultural infrastructure. We've got to continue to support authors and illustrators and bookstores and libraries and publishers, literary organizations, festivals, to continue that effective work. So Australia Reads is here to bring us together to look at how we increase reading engagement. We're a collaboration and a conversation. So I'm really looking forward to today. This very much includes you. And so I would absolutely love to hear some of your questions. Jess, if you're there, I don't know if you have access to what people are talking about. And
you've hit on so many of the things that people are talking about, Anna. Of course, I mean, there's so much in what you've just said there about what reading gives us, but also what our audience have identified as some of the obstacles and barriers to people engaging in reading. So Simone has made the point that there are sort of behavioural challenges where more of us are distracted by these things than ever before, and we're finding it harder and harder to sit still and focus. I think is one of the things that's been flagged in the chat. So it does speak to the point that you made, that this isn't just about people knowing that reading is good for them. It's how do we engage with those intrinsic motivations and those and people's capacity and behaviour in terms of getting involved in reading. So that's one theme. There are some other questions here around the challenge that a lot of those teacher librarians and librarians that you mentioned are experiencing when they're trying to engage young people in reading, and how you select books for children that gear towards their hobbies and interests, and how do you encourage and engage children in more reading when after school activities and sport commitments, and it's not just adults that are distracted and time poor like the 37% you talked about, it's also kids and young people. So how do we carve out time for reading to also be one of those really important activities? So it's interesting that so many of the comments and questions are about behaviour and making time and space and elevating the role of reading in our lives. It's not the kind of the structural stuff that maybe we might have expected to hear about. Do you have any thoughts about some of those
Well, I think there's a little of both. I think there are some fantastic programs that already exist out there. I'm thinking 100 Story Building, Sydney Story Factory, all of there are organizations and public libraries that are kind of have book clubs, that there are spaces, that there are programs that people engage with. I think the point that someone made there about making sure that you're finding out what the reader is interested in, and this is regardless of their age. What are they interested in? So I often hear a question, whether I'm in a bookstore or a library, you'll get a parent or a teacher coming in and asking, I have a 7-year-old, what book should I buy for them? I don't know anything about that 7-year-old. That 7-year-old might love outer space. That 7-year-old might love nonfiction. That 7-year-old might be super into dragons. So kind of really understanding what the reader is most interested in. And it's almost when I used to be involved with the Inside a Dog website, which used to exist for young readers to share what they were reading, we had a huge fan club at the year that the One Direction book came out. Everybody wanted to talk about the One Direction book. They were reading. They were absolutely getting into the reading behaviors. They were just coming in through fandom. And that's a great thing. So really coming in from the interest level is really important.
I mean, that resonates because we're on a waiting list for the Sam Kerr books at our local library. We managed to get one, but the waiting list is long for the Matilda's books at the moment, because everybody is coming in, as you say, through fandom and connecting with passion. So it's a really powerful way to get people, young people and people, all kinds of people, hooked on reading. There's a question here from Emma as well about whether there's any sense of how often parents actually do read to children, and whether that is an important way in.
That it's absolutely an important way in, because we talk about, what are reading programs for children? These don't happen in isolation. So it's really important that we target our programs. We're thinking about who our reader is whenever we're designing a program or a marketing campaign or commissioning a new work. We're thinking about who that 7-year-old or that 12-year-old, that 25-year-old is. But we're also got to think about the people around them and the influence around them. And so parents are critical to this. There has been research that's shown that children love parents reading to them, and that parents stop when the child has the technical capability to be able to read for themselves, and that the kids want them to keep going, that it's an important family bonding moment. So what we're seeing here is that reading is important, but what reading is doing is supporting family connection, and that might be the message that we need to focus on, is how do we support family connection? Read together regularly. Don't stop once they're able to do it for themselves. Keep it going, and then it becomes a part incorporated into part of daily life. And kids kids spot when we say we should do something, and then we don't do it ourselves. So I think the more important that we've got just to be visibly reading, it normalizes it. And if something is normalized in a particular culture, if you're talking about it, if you're modeling it, if you're demonstrating it, even in a really small way for 2 minutes, you're reading a book when the kids come into class. You ask a quick question at the dinner table. Hey, what did you read? You do it at a party. Hey, what are you reading now, as opposed to what do you do for work? Or what did you get out of reading? Hey, which book made you smile recently? Which story? Because it might be an audiobook, it might be an ebook. And what we don't know is, if we ask people if they read, how are they interpreting that? So yeah, lots of thoughts.
There's another kind of aligned comment here from Wendy that I think is so thoughtful, which is that the key is getting kids talking to each other. And so that goes back to that idea of connection and embedding a culture of reading. It's not just parents leading it, or teacher librarians or teachers. It's kids actually talking about the books that they love to each other. I think that's really such a powerful observation. Yeah.
When you look at TikTok or BookTok, like, the internet is amplifying the behavior, and the behavior is peer recommendation. And so the more that we can encourage peer recommendation in different settings, some of which might be algorithms on the internet, then that's exactly what we're doing. We're helping them foster that kind of positive peer culture themselves. It's a great thing. And I can see that the questions that are coming in, we've got a really interesting mix, because I'm conscious we're coming to time for this session, Jess. But we've got a couple of two kind of questions. There's like, what's the really specific practical things that people can do day to day with readers in their community right now? And then what are the kind of national campaigns? What are the structures? What are the programs that people can tap into, or what programs might already exist, or what programs do we need to create that people can tap into? And I think that's kind of really, that's Volume's kind of tackling that kind of those two layers. And so I hope you keep asking these questions as we go through the day, everyone, because Jess and I will both be back in the end session when we talk about what a successful reading nation looks like. And I think we want to make sure that the questions you're asking through the day, we're kind of like pulling that into the panel at the end of our session, because that will help us work out where we go to next.
That's a great observation, Anna. It isn't just about, that individual sort of tactical, what you do every day in your school, in your library, in your organization. It's also what can we do as a sector to build a reading nation. But they're obviously they're both very, very connected. Some really, really thoughtful comments in here, and some shout outs to some great programs. Louise has given a shout out to Better Beginnings in WA, which is run through the State Library of WA, and their amazing early literacy program. There are some questions as well about whether there are challenges that kids experience when they're visualizing, and whether they're less likely to engage with silent reading, if there are other ways to bring kids in. So we're hearing, as you say, about programs, but also about individual practices and addressing each reader as an individual, which is something else that you referenced.
I think we'll see a theme from that from some of our speakers later in the day as well, that really can we explode the notion of what reading is and what a book event is? Because at the end of the day, a book club has this sort of conscious, it's the nerdy kids in the library in a circle, or it's mums doing wine and cheese. But actually what that is a conversation about books. It's a social experience about books, and how do we get more of that? That can happen through treasure hunts, through apps, through screens, there's so many different ways. If we take the focus and the pressure, I think someone used the word pressure there, off the you must read, and much more about, hey, there are these great stories, there are the great facts to learn, there's this, and really put the focus on the content rather than the delivery.
And to close that, just going back to something that Nadi said, and I've had someone in the chat already say, how can I watch that again? Because that is really resonating in my mind. And don't worry, by the end of the day, we'll let you know about those videos and how it will be possible to engage with the content again. But the whole continent is a library. So how do we connect back, to reading back into place, reading as a social activity and embodied outdoors communal activity is a wonderful idea to have floating in our minds as we go through the rest of today. And we'll be seeing lots of each other today. So I don't even need to say goodbye, really. But thank you so much.
again later. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.
So thanks for that, Anna.